Welcome to the Robots vs. Vampires podcast. I'm Adrian Smith, and I'm so excited to dive into another day of mind-blowing sci-fi and fantasy with you.
And I'm Julia Jones, ready to explore the unbelievable.
You know, Julia, this show is all about unearthing those epic tales, the twists you never saw coming, and figuring out where the line blurs between fact and fiction.
Right.
And today we're sinking our teeth into a classic creature of the night,
Ooh.
the vampire. But we're not talking about any sparkly romantic types here. We're talking fangs, shadows, and lore that's been passed down for centuries.
A real deal.
Exactly. We want to discover what makes these stories so captivating.
Yes.
So if you're ready to join us on this adventure, make sure to hit that rate and follow button. It helps other curious minds find their way into these incredible worlds.
I think you'll be surprised by the twists some of these stories take.
Okay, let's get into it. We've got this amazing collection of vampire short stories, each one offering a unique take on the myth.
Some explore vampire hunters facing ancient prophecies, while others delve into the consequences of curses and transformations, and you won't believe the unexpected allies that emerge along the way.
What really stands out to me is how many of these stories subvert classic vampire tropes, like in The Last Sunlight, where the vampires are actually trying to save humanity from a new kind of monster that thrives in the dark as the sun begins to die.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
That reminds me of Bitten Future, where a teenage girl who's been turned into a vampire finds herself tangled in a mystery that could determine the fate of both vampires and humans. It's a race against time with the fate of two species hanging in the balance.
Then there's Blood, Oath, and Shadow, where this teenage outcast is forced to become a vampire and ends up fighting in a secret war between different vampire factions. Talk about being thrown into the deep end.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And the Night Riders throws us into a post-apocalyptic world where vampires rule and humans are fighting for survival. A group of rebels, led by a teenager, are desperately searching for a legendary sanctuary that's supposed to be vampire-free.
Interesting.
These stories really highlight the resilience of both humans and vampires and how they can sometimes forge the most unexpected alliances in the face of danger.
Right.
Speaking of which, the Serpent's Tomb pairs an adventurer with a vampire archaeologist who are on a quest for an ancient artifact that holds the key to immortality.
And it's not just about finding this artifact. They have to navigate a treacherous jungle guarded by a fearsome serpent. The real heart of the story is their exploration of what it truly means to live forever and if it's even something to desire.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Blood and Bravado throws a curveball into the mix with a teenage vampire who doesn't even have fangs.
Oh.
He has to rely on his wit and some unexpected abilities to challenge a powerful vampire lord and prove that strength comes in many forms.
I like that.
It's interesting to see how many of these stories feature unusual settings. For instance, Starved for Light takes place in a world where solar flares disrupt the balance of day and night, forcing vampires to search for new energy sources. They even end up forming alliances with solar beings.
Now that's what I call thinking outside the coffin. What other unusual settings caught your eye?
Dust and Defiance is another post-apocalyptic story where vampires rule the night. But this time, a rebellious teenager leads a group of human survivors on motorcycles as they fight for their freedom.
Okay.
Imagine racing through a desolate wasteland, the wind whipping through your hair as you try to outrun both the darkness and the vampires who control it.
Talk about high-octane thrills.
Right, I can almost hear the roar of those engines.
And then there's Vanishing Act, where a shape-shifting vampire infiltrates a cult of vampire hunters. But things get complicated when he finds himself protecting a human girl who has a unique connection to his powers.
This sounds like it's full of suspense and intrigue.
It definitely keeps you guessing.
Yeah.
But, Adrian, one thing that really surprised me was how many of these stories incorporated humor.
Oh,
It's not all doom and gloom in the vampire world.
I'm all ears. Tell me about these comedic takes on vampire lore.
Okay.
What kind of funny situations do these bloodsuckers find themselves in?
Well, in Bloodsucker Blues, we meet this awkward teenage vampire who decides to vlog about his newfound life as a vampire.
Hold on, a vampire vlogger. That's hilarious.
It gets even better. He unintentionally becomes a social media star, which attracts the attention of vampire slayers.
So not only is he dealing with the usual vampire struggles, but now he's got internet fame and a target on his back. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
It is, but in a funny way. But his newfound fame also makes him a key player in trying to bring peace between humans and vampires. So it's not all just laughs. There's a deeper message there about acceptance and understanding.
Now that's a twist I didn't see coming, a vampire influencer promoting peace. It makes you wonder what other unexpected roles these creatures could play in our modern world. Speaking of unexpected, what about Eclipse Academy?
Oh, yes. Imagine a secret academy where both vampires and vampire hunters are students. That's the setting for Eclipse Academy.
Now that's an interesting mix. What happens when these sworn enemies are forced to share a classroom?
Well, a vampire and a vampire hunter end up having to work together to stop a conspiracy that threatens to expose the entire supernatural world to humans. Talk about high stakes.
Whoa. This sounds like a story that's full of action suspense and maybe even a touch of forbidden romance.
Yeah,
I'm hooked.
it's a wild ride, that's for sure. But Adrian, one thing that makes these stories so compelling is how many of them delve into the internal conflicts of vampires.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not just mindless monsters, they're often grappling with their own humanity and making difficult choices.
It's that inner struggle that really makes them relatable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even though they're these supernatural beings, they're dealing with some very human emotions and dilemmas. What are some of the stories that really highlight these internal conflicts?
Well, Nightfall's Promise is a classic tale of forbidden love. It features a vampire prince who chooses to live among humans and ends up falling in love with a human girl.
Ah, forbidden love. That never ends well, does it? What kind of obstacles does he face?
He has to choose between his duty to his kind and his love for this woman, all while protecting her from some pretty dark forces. It's a story about sacrifice, loyalty, and the choices we make in the name of love.
That sounds intense.
Well,
What other stories explore these deeper themes?
Awakening, also known as Sight of Blood, is a really fascinating story that plays with the idea of perception and how we see the world.
Okay.
A teenage girl has a near-death experience and develops the ability to see vampires in their true form, which is obviously a problem in a world where vampires are trying to blend in.
I bet that throws her life into chaos. What does she do with this newfound ability?
She's dragged into the vampire world and forced to decide whether to expose them or protect them. It's a story about empathy, understanding, and challenging our own preconceived notions.
It's amazing how these stories can take a familiar creature like the vampire and use it to explore such complex themes. They really make you think about what it means to be human and how we define good and evil.
Absolutely. And speaking of challenging norms, Fangs and Fitting In offers a more lighthearted take on this theme.
Okay.
It follows a teenage vampire who discovers a boarding school for supernatural creatures.
So, like Hogwarts for vampires and werewolves. Sign me up. What's it like for her?
It's a place where she finally feels like she belongs, surrounded by other outcasts and misfits. It's a story about finding your tribe, embracing your differences, and the power of acceptance.
I love that idea. It's heartwarming to think that even vampires can find a place where they feel understood and accepted. What other heartwarming vampire stories are out there?
Well, Night Shift features a vampire who turns into a flea-infested bat during the day.
Oh.
Not exactly glamorous, right?
And I can imagine that's not the most comfortable transformation. What's his story?
He's desperately searching for a cure for his curse, but he's not the only one looking for it. The competition is fierce, and the stakes are high.
Sounds like he's in for a wild ride.
He is. And then there's Fangs of Fury, where we see a vampire who's not just fighting for survival, but leading a rebellion.
Okay, now that's something I haven't seen before. A vampire revolutionary. What's he rebelling against?
He's got this ragtag group of outcasts, and they're fighting against a ruthless empire that's enslaving magical beings.
Wow, so he's not just fighting for his own kind, but for all magical creatures who are being oppressed. That's pretty noble for a vampire.
And it's not just about fighting in power. This particular vampire is more concerned with getting a good slice of pizza than ruling the world.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I guess even revolutionaries need their comfort food. What kind of powers and abilities do these rebel vampires have?
Well, we see a variety of powers in these stories. Some vampires have powers related to their connection to the night, like enhanced senses, super strength, and of course the ability to shapeshift.
And then there are vampires who can control shadows, manipulate blood, or even bend luck to their will. Some of them even have psychic abilities like telepathy and illusion casting.
Right.
The possibilities are endless.
Exactly. And in Blood and Heartbeats, we encounter a rebellious vampire who develops a serum that offers temporary humanity.
Hold on, temporary humanity. That's a wild twist. Why would a vampire want to be human even temporarily?
It's a fascinating exploration of what it means to be human and the lengths we'll go to hold onto our humanity even when we're considered monsters.
That's a really thought-provoking concept. Yeah. Makes you wonder if there's a part of every vampire that yearns for a taste of what it's like to be human again.
And it also explores how humans react when faced with the possibility of vampires temporarily becoming more like them.
Yeah.
It creates all sorts of chaos and unexpected consequences.
So it's not just about the vampires themselves, but also about how their choices affect the world around them and the delicate balance between humans and the supernatural.
Precisely. Now, you mentioned different ways vampires are created. Are we seeing anything beyond the traditional bite in these stories?
Absolutely. In some stories, vampires are genetically engineered, like in Project Sunrise, where scientists are trying to create super soldiers,
Wow.
or they're accidentally created through scientific experiments gone wrong, like in Blood and Heartbeats.
Yeah.
It's really intriguing how these different origin stories affect how the vampires see themselves and interact with the world.
It raises questions about nature versus nurture. Are they victims of circumstance, or are they embracing their monstrous nature? And how much control do they really have over their destinies?
It also makes you wonder if being a vampire is something that's thrust upon them or if it's a choice they make.
There's also the element of ancient curses and prophecies playing a role in some of these stories. In The Dragon's Ransom, a vampire knight is on a quest to steal a crown from a dragon to break a curse that's been placed upon him.
Talk about a high-stakes heist. I'm guessing there's a time limit on this curse.
You bet Sunrise is definitely not his friend.
So it's a race against time, and he's up against the dragon. This knight has his work cut out for him.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Starved for Light earlier. It also features ancient prophecies, but it's the solar flares that disrupt the balance between day and night, forcing vampires to seek out new sources of energy.
And remember those unlikely partnerships with solar beings. That's a twist I never saw coming. It makes you think about the strange alliances that might emerge when the world is thrown into chaos.
It really does. But Adrian, one thing that always fascinates me about vampire stories is the political intrigue that often gets woven into the narrative.
Oh, I love a good power struggle.
Yeah.
What kind of political machinations are these vampires involved in?
In the Immortal Codex, a vampire historian discovers an ancient manuscript that holds the secret to ending vampirism. This discovery sends her on a globe-trotting adventure to find a cure, but not everyone wants to be cured.
Of course not. Some vampires might see their immortality as a gift, not a curse. What kind of resistance does she encounter?
There are those who want to keep the secret for themselves, fearing what might happen if humans gain the upper hand. And then there are those who believe that vampirism is their birthright and should be preserved at all costs.
So it's not just a search for a cure, but also a battle for the future of the vampire race.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that even among vampires, there are different factions and ideologies, each with their own agenda.
Speaking of agendas, what about Bloodsucker Blues and the teenage vampire, whose vlogs inadvertently get him involved in vampire politics?
Yes. Right. He becomes a symbol for those who want peace with humans, which makes him a target for the more traditional vampires who want to maintain the status quo.
It's a classic struggle between tradition and change, and it's often the younger generation that ends up being the catalyst for that change.
Absolutely. We see this in Eclipse Academy as well, where the students uncover a conspiracy that threatens both the human and vampire worlds. They're forced to step up and fight for what they believe in, even if it means going against their own.
And don't forget Fangs of Fury, where the rebellion against this tyrannical empire is led by a vampire who's more interested in pizza than world domination. It's a reminder that unlikely heroes can emerge from anywhere, even from the ranks of the so-called monsters.
It's a testament to the power of individuals to make a difference regardless of their background or species.
And speaking of backgrounds, many of these stories are set in such unique and imaginative worlds. What are some that really captured your imagination, Julia?
Well, the Neon Jungle is a fascinating blend of cyberpunk and vampire lore. It's set in a futuristic city where vampires rule, and the only light comes from neon signs that ward off the darkness.
I love the visual imagery of that. A neon-drenched city ruled by vampires. That's a movie I'd watch.
And the story itself is just as compelling. A human thief and a vampire outcast have to team up to steal a relic that controls the city's day-night cycle.
So they're not just trying to survive, but they're fighting for control over the very essence of the city itself.
Exactly. And it's a story about challenging authority, defying expectations, and finding common ground in the most unexpected places.
And then you have Fangs and Fitting In, which explores this hidden world of boarding schools and secret societies where supernatural creatures are learning to coexist.
Right.
Like a supernatural coming-of-age story where these young creatures are trying to figure out who they are and where they belong in a world that often fears and rejects them.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of worlds, there can be pockets of hope and acceptance.
And that sometimes it's the outcasts and the misfits who create the most welcoming and inclusive communities.
I'm also really drawn to Dust and Defiance, with its gritty, post-apocalyptic setting.
Yeah.
Vampires control a night, humans are fighting back, and there's this constant tension between the two.
It's a world where the rules have changed and the lines between monster and hero were blurred.
It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, there's still a fight for survival, for freedom, and for a better future.
And it's a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt, overcome, and find hope in the most desolate of circumstances.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Julia. These stories are more than just entertainment. They're a reflection of our own hopes, fears, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness.
They offer a glimpse into the complexities of human nature, the choices we make, and the consequences of those choices.
And they remind us that even in the darkest of times, there's always a flicker of hope, a chance for redemption, and the possibility of finding connection and belonging, even in the most unexpected places.
And sometimes it's the creatures we fear the most who teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves.
Well said, Julia. Now we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our vampire exploration, but we've got so much more to uncover. Stay tuned as we delve even deeper into these fascinating stories, dissecting their themes, analyzing their characters, and uncovering the secrets that make vampire lore so enduring and captivating.
And who knows, we might even learn a thing or two about ourselves along the way.
Until next time, keep those imaginations running wild.
Welcome back to the Robots vs. Vampires podcast. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring the captivating world of vampire stories.
Yeah, as we were talking about those unique worlds, I was reminded of Vanishing Act, that twist with the shape-shifting vampire protecting a human girl who's connected to his powers. Just stuck with me.
It's a fantastic example of how these stories can blend genres and play with expectations. You have the action and intrigue of a spy thriller, but then you layer in the emotional depth of a story about protection and unexpected bonds.
And Bloodsucker Blues takes a completely different approach, bringing vampires into the age of social media.
Right.
The idea of a vampire vlogger navigating internet fame while trying to foster peace between humans and vampires is just brilliant.
It's a clever commentary on how technology and social media can both amplify our voices and make us vulnerable at the same time. And for a vampire, that vulnerability is magnified tenfold.
It makes you wonder how vampires would navigate the modern world. Would they embrace technology or would they try to remain hidden in the shadows?
That's a great question, and it's something that a lot of these stories explore. Some vampires adapt and integrate, while others resist change and cling to tradition.
It's like a reflection of our own anxieties about technology and the rapid pace of change in society.
Exactly. But one thing that remains consistent in these stories is the enduring appeal of the vampire myth itself.
Why do you think we're so drawn to these creatures of the night? What is it about them that keeps us coming back for more?
I think it's the duality of their nature. They represent both our darkest desires and our longing for connection. They're powerful, seductive, and dangerous, but also often cursed and isolated.
It's like they embody our fascination with immortality and power, but also our fears of losing our humanity.
Precisely, and the best vampire stories explore these themes in really compelling ways. They make us question what it means to be human, what sacrifices we're willing to make, and how we define good and evil.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of vampire stories, I want to leave you with this thought. If you were a vampire, what would be the most challenging part of your existence? The thirst, the sunlight, or the internal struggle to hold on to your humanity?
It's definitely something to ponder.
Isn't it? We hope you've enjoyed this exploration into the dark and fascinating world of vampires.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another epic adventure into the realms of sci-fi and fantasy. Until then, keep those fangs sharp and those imaginations running wild.
Welcome back to the Robots vs. Vampires podcast. We're wrapping up our exploration of vampire stories with some tales that really push the boundaries of the genre.
One thing that struck me is how many of these stories take us on a journey through time and history.
But
Like The Ottoman Bite, where a vampire is trying to prevent a war between humans and vampires in the Sultan's court.
imagine the intrigue. Trying to maintain your cover in a place full of secrets and whispers, all while resisting the urge to drain the nearest nobleman.
It's got to be tough. And then you've got Venetian Shadows, where a newly turned vampire is caught up in a conspiracy in Renaissance Venice.
Right.
It's like a historical thriller with a supernatural twist.
And don't forget Twilight of the Republic, set in ancient Athens. A vampire philosopher has to choose between protecting his immortality and speaking out against a secret that could destroy democracy.
It really makes you think about the weight of such a choice. To stay silent and survive or risk everything for a greater good. These stories really highlight how vampires can be woven into any historical period, adding a layer of mystique and danger.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget the post-apocalyptic settings. Crimson Oasis takes place in a world where water is scarce and a vampire enclave has to defend the last remaining source. It's a desperate struggle for survival against all odds.
Talk about high stakes. And Blood Symphony introduces us to a deaf vampire who experiences sound as color. Imagine a world where music can unlock vampire powers. It's a beautiful concept, isn't it? Turning a disability into a unique strength.
It really is, and it speaks to the adaptability and resilience of these creatures. They find ways to thrive even in the most challenging environments.
And we see that same adaptability in Rio's Carnival of Shadows, with a vampire capoeira master who's sworn to protect his city during Carnival. The Carnival is in full swing, but an ancient vampire has arrived intent on claiming Brazil as his kingdom.
Capoeira, the Brazilian martial art, that's like a dance.
Exactly. Our hero has to use all his skills and cunning to stop this ancient evil and keep the carnival from turning into a bloodbath.
I can almost hear the music and see the vibrant costumes with this epic showdown between vampires happening in the midst of it all.
It's a story that blends action culture and the supernatural in a really exciting way. And then there's Blood and Heartbeats, which throws a curveball into the mix. A teenage vampire develops a serum that gives vampires temporary humanity.
So instead of feeling the sun, these vampires are actually craving a taste of human life. What a fascinating concept.
It really is, and it leads to all sorts of chaos.
Yeah.
Humans are freaking out, vampires are divided, and the whole world is trying to figure out what it means to be human or not.
It's a story that challenges our perceptions of what it means to be a monster and what it means to be human. It asks us to consider the possibility of change and the consequences that come with it.
You know, Julia, as we've been discussing these stories, I've been struck by the sheer creativity and diversity of the vampire genre. There's something for everyone, from historical thrillers to post-apocalyptic adventures to stories that explore the complexities of identity and belonging.
It's a testament to the enduring power of the vampire myth. These creatures continue to fascinate us because they tap into our deepest fears and desires, forcing us to confront the darker aspects of ourselves and the choices we make in the face of temptation and adversity.
And they remind us that even in the face of darkness, there's always a flicker of hope, a chance for redemption, and the possibility of finding connection and belonging, even in most unexpected places.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our exploration of vampire stories, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. If you could ask one question to a real-life vampire, what would it be?
That's a great question. It really makes you think. I guess I would ask them what they miss most about being human.
That's a really insightful question, Adrian. It gets to the heart of what makes these stories so compelling. The vampires are often portrayed as both powerful and cursed, longing for something they can never truly have again.
It's that sense of longing and loss that makes them so relatable, even though they're these supernatural beings.
Exactly. Well, Adrian, it's been a pleasure diving into these stories with you. I always learned so much from our conversations.
The feeling is mutual, Julia. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark and fascinating world of vampires.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Don't forget to rate, follow, and share the show so we can keep bringing more awesome adventures into the realms of sci-fi and fantasy.
And until next time, keep those imaginations running wild.
And remember, sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones that make us question what it truly means to be human.